Good morning. How are you today? Oh, it's gorgeous to be out today. Yesterday it rained and I didn't get out, so I apologize for not being with you. But I'm not just a fair weather friend. The Jefferson report goes like this. It's in the 70s. The sun is out. The wind is about 2 miles an hour. Very pleasant. Very nice out. So what's going on? Well, there are several stories, big stories, and they continue to be the ones that we follow with sometimes grand and other times petty iterations of change. Right now, in the criminal case involving Trump in Lower Manhattan, we're really talking about jury selection right now. Now, the idea of finding the honest juror to be the accused peer is an interesting concept, but like most of them, it doesn't really work out in practice. And so you have to guard against the aspects that make it more like roulette than like a laboratory of justice. So when we're selecting jurors, to the extent that the parties have anything to say, are they fishing for bias? So, for example, Trump is looking for somebody with one of his hats and gruff and less educated and so forth, going by what he said before. And I'm not saying that those are bad characteristics to look for him to look for if he's looking for bias. So what are the prosecutors looking for? I don't know, liberals, Democrats, people that can't stand Trump, perhaps. So we begin the process with these problems. We don't operate under laboratory conditions. Now, but we are trying. And the rules of evidence in the case are to give to us what are reliable pieces of evidence that we could use. So, for instance, if somebody says something and it's not an admission and doesn't fit certain rules, then maybe it's hearsay, and then maybe it's not admissible because it's not reliable. So there are rules to try to approximate justice. But like many other things, the devil's in the details. And one has to work at getting anything like a fair proceeding. And in that sense, it counts that we have experienced counsel on both sides and that the judge is experienced, so that the proceeding has a greater probability of being fair. And you saw how when Trump sort of stepped out of line, the judge pushed him back by directing his remarks to Trump's counsel. That's what happens in a good case. Now, not everything that goes, quote, wrong in a case is willful, but it's going to be hard for us to believe in the case of Trump that that's ever true, because he's a conniving SOB and has been his whole life. And wary be ye, who would think that this guy is ever concerned about doing what's right, and he only cares about being free. The court so far had 7 jurors. 2 were removed because of questions about them. That's the winnowing process, trying to get fair jurors, impartial. And with one of those jurors, we were put on notice that a problem with this jury is that there are those out there who are going to try to locate them and find them and talk to them. And one of them had gotten, I don't know if she said 100 calls, but it was because of that she changed her mind about being willing, able to be impartial in the matter. So you have that kind of a problem. So the 2 jurors have been struck, so we're down to 5, but the judge just went through all the questionnaires, and I'm talking to you at midday, went through the questionnaires, and so the winnowing process will resume. And we might possibly get a jury by today, but not the alternates. And what does that mean? It means the part of the case that we're all familiar with, the openings by the parties, they could go forward on Monday. And so that's, if that happens, that's like a week faster than the original prognostication. So that's good. The opening will perhaps deal with what Trump has been saying publicly. Now, he has two stories. Navarro did the same thing, and you've heard me mention him before. Navarro would argue outside the court and say, if I can only say this in the court, and never say it in the court. So I don't think he won it in public opinion doing that. And he certainly didn't win it in the courtroom because he was convicted and now is in prison. So Trump's operative argument is sympathy. Now, one of his categories of sympathy is how can we get a free jury, because they're picking a place where the second worst place in the entire nation to try me. But how can you have sympathy for a person who creates the spectacle that's then reported that now he feels redounds to his detriment rather than his benefit? But that's one of his arguments. Why we don't push back and just say that, I don't know. It's astonishing to me how obvious arguments aren't made. And it's kind of curious that our comics at night, okay, yes, there's a cut to it, but the remarks that they make are often spot on. And full-time politicians and court lawyers and judges should pay attention to what they say, because those arguments cut right down to the bone, right where it matters. And we don't look at those things. There is on the campaign trail questions about Robert Kennedy Jr. and his family is in the difficult position of having to rebut their own family member and say to disregard him in an election. Now, I spent some small amount of time with his dad, many have, and he was a regular guy, but when called upon to give a speech or to do something of some difficulty, that's when he's shown. He showed himself to, I think, to be different from when he was JFK's campaign manager. And the notions of his ruthlessness abounded. But he found a different person. And that person very different than the current son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., trading on his name, but with a very different persona and gathering of issues that one would want to support or not. So I got to work with and know Ted Kennedy and Kerry Kennedy and Karen Kennedy, and got to know them during the 1980 campaign. And their attitudes and feelings and devotion are genuine. And like many, I followed what Robert Kennedy had to say in his efforts to save streams and rivers and to argue about the environment. And I read a book he wrote several times because I thought it had lessons worth reread. But he lost it, and he's in nowhere land. And I don't know where it comes from. There's no need to offer alternatives. He just is taken with some crazy theories and wants to be a spoiler. And normally in that case, if you're anywhere within the circumference of the universe that Trump would dominate, it usually involves Trump, and it usually involves some sort of transaction. So I'd hate to think that, but I think it's entirely possible and absolutely true. I was feted at Ethel Kennedy's home on Hickory Hill when I ran for Congress many years ago. And so I have a special affection for the family, how they helped me when I needed help. And I was always glad to support the issues I could insofar as I could. And it's painful to see Robert Kennedy sort of go off the reservation the way he has. In terms of other associations that matters, the hearings on the Hill yesterday involved my old alma mater, where I went to engineering school at Columbia and law school at Columbia. And I was there in 1968 when we had what some called riots. I guess we called them protests. And we're kind of revisiting those days because questions have been raised about the demonstrations by pro-Palestinians and anti-Semitic talk and shout-outs. This is a multidimensional problem that can't be cured easily. It seems to me that Congress is looking at it to try to score points, political points, not to actually be constructive. They're sort of weighing in and saying, if you're not doing enough for one party or the other, then you're failing and maybe you should resign. Now, the current president of the university is quite capable in a variety of ways to be handling this difficulty. Shavik is her name, S-H-A-F-I-K, excuse me. And so she's a significant individual, and we should not be concerned about her competence or her ability to address this problem. And the hearing yesterday, in a way, was a no hearing because she agreed that we have to handle these issues carefully. And woe be the one who think it'd be easy to figure out what the ground rules are of dealing with such an intense emotional conflict with a long history of strife and settlement and disagreement and hurt. And the current context is no better. So that said, I think that if you were a university president, you'd have to decide how you looked at speech plus. So for example, talking about speech and you're expressing an opinion against Israel or against the Palestinians or Hamas in Gaza. And how do you do that? Well, we can expect it to be imperfect, but we also need it to be somehow civil. Because the failure of our processes in and out of government to be civil are the failures of a civilization. If we only think we can shout down the other or shut them out or kill them or coerce them or hurt them in some way, then we're not governing. We're not a free country. And one does have to ask questions about how government sees itself holding these hearings and judging for private universities how the universities are being run. That sounds to me more like a compromise of the First Amendment rights of these educational institutions than it does a remedy for difficult questions about how we advocate between and among ourselves. So if we say intifada, which is basically an upraising and to overthrow the government, is that like inciting to riot? If we say, from the river to the sea, Palestinian will be free, are we saying something that is provocative, exciting, troubling, and the old expression that we use from time to time are these fighting words. Now, at Columbia, what they did was and what Shafik did was she set certain times and places for protests to occur. Now, it's not about Columbia so much, but I've watched some universities and schools are debating how they handle commencement exercises. You know, is the valedictorian going to get up there and once holding onto the mic, go off on some issue or other? And the answer is possibly. And so instead of wondering if that's going to happen, it seems to me that either there's no discussion of that issue, that doesn't make me comfortable, or if we know there's going to be two sides, then you have two valedictorians. You have to figure out how to accommodate the current times, which are difficult, to teach the lesson that we advance ourselves, our causes, and our standard of civilization by how we act in the most difficult of circumstances. And these are plainly that. So, those are a couple of thoughts I have today. And it's nice to be out here. I'm sorry I wasn't out yesterday. I did miss it, and I miss you guys. And I expect, weather things permitting, I'll be here again tomorrow. So I wish you well from my Cathedral of Trees on this gorgeous day, absolutely gorgeous. Swimming soon outside. Bye-bye.